The first thing Major Kestrel Wraith Nakamura noticed wasn't the radar signature that shouldn't exist, or the way her F-22 Raptor's sensors screamed warnings into her helmet. It was the silence that followed. Dead air where chatter should flow between the four-ship formation patrolling the contested airspace above the South China Sea. Even Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Viper Rodriguez, notorious for his running commentary during missions, had gone quiet in the lead aircraft. "Wraith, you seeing this?" Rodriguez's voice finally crackled through the encrypted channel, stripped of its usual bravado. His F-22 maintained formation 2,000 feet ahead and slightly left of Nakamura's position, its angular stealth frame cutting through the morning haze like a blade through silk. Nakamura's eyes tracked across her multifunction displays, confirming what her gut already knew. The ghostly contacts weren't behaving like any known aircraft in any nation's inventory. They moved in perfect synchronization, their radar cross-sections flickering in and out of existence with mathematical precision. But there was something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her grip tighten on the stick. The afterburner pattern. She'd seen it before, 6 months ago during a classified exercise over Nevada. The same rhythmic pulse of heat signatures, the same impossible formation flying. The exercise that officially never happened, involving aircraft that officially didn't exist, flown by pilots whose names were officially redacted from every after-action report. "Control, Viper 1, Rodriguez transmitted to the AWACS aircraft orbiting safely behind them. "Request immediate clarification on bogey identification. We have 4 unknowns, bearing 090, Angels 35, maintaining course 180. The response came swift and cold. "Viper flight, maintain observation posture. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Repeat, weapons hold authorized." Nakamura felt the familiar weight of skepticism from her flight members. She was the newest addition to the 27th Fighter Squadron, transferred in after what the official records called an administrative reassignment. What they didn't say was that she'd been the only pilot to successfully intercept and identify the Ghost Squadron during Exercise Crimson Mirror, and that her detailed debriefing had been classified so deep it required presidential clearance to access. They also didn't say that she'd recognized the lead aircraft's pilot by his unique tactical signature, despite his death being confirmed 2 years earlier in a training accident over the Pacific. Captain James Phantom Chen had been her wingman, her mentor, and according to the Pentagon, her imagined specter born from survivors' guilt and post-traumatic stress. Now, watching the impossible formation dance through her targeting display, Nakamura wondered if she was about to prove them all wrong, or if the ghosts in her mind had finally learned to fly. The hunt was about to begin, and she wasn't sure who was the hunter anymore. Major Nakamura's breathing remained steady, controlled, even as her heart hammered against her chest harness. The Raptor's cockpit felt smaller now, its familiar confines transformed into something between sanctuary and trap. Her tactical display showed the bogies maintaining their southeastern heading, but there was something about their micro-adjustments that spoke to her on a level deeper than training. "Wraith, talk to me," came the voice of Captain Sarah Nomad Williams from the number 3 position. Williams was old guard, a veteran of 3 deployments who'd earned her call sign by never staying in one squadron long enough to form attachments. "Your RWR painting anything unusual?" Nakamura's radar warning receiver remained clean, which was part of the problem. These contacts were showing up on multiple sensors but somehow avoiding the electromagnetic signatures that should accompany any powered aircraft. She keyed her mic, choosing her words carefully. "Negative paint on threat systems, but their formation discipline is familiar." "Familiar how?" Rodriguez's question carried an edge that suggested he was beginning to take her observations seriously. The man might swagger like a Top Gun reject, but his combat record spoke louder than his ego. "Give me 30 seconds to run a pattern analysis." Nakamura's fingers danced across her keypad, pulling up archived flight data from her personal storage system. The Raptor's advanced computers could process vast amounts of tactical information, but this required something more intuitive. She overlaid the current formation geometry against historical patterns stored in her helmet's heads-up display. The match was 93%. "Control, Wraith," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the implications racing through her mind. "Request permission to close for visual identification. I believe we may be dealing with a case of mistaken identity rather than hostile intent." The silence that followed stretched for 15 seconds, an eternity in tactical aviation. When the AWACS controller responded, his tone had shifted from routine monitoring to acute interest. "Wraith, Control, explain your assessment." "Sir, the formation geometry and flight characteristics match known friendly patterns. I recommend approach from bearing 270, maintaining Angels 30, with weapons safe." "Negative, Wraith. All aircraft maintain current positions and continue observation." Rodriguez's voice cut across the channel, irritation bleeding through. "Control, Viper 1. What's the holdup? We've got 4 unknowns in restricted airspace and you're running a book club." But Nakamura was already making her decision. Her Raptor began a subtle turn, bleeding altitude and adjusting course to intercept the mysterious formation from their port quarter. The move was aggressive enough to trigger responses from both her wingmen and the unknowns, but calculated to avoid appearing overtly hostile. "Wraith, what the hell are you doing?" Williams's voice carried the sharp edge of a pilot watching her formation leader deviate from orders. "Getting answers," Nakamura replied, her eyes locked on the lead bogey as it began its own subtle course correction. The dance had begun, a complex aerial ballet of approach and response that would determine whether she was about to make first contact with an unknown threat or finally lay to rest the ghosts that had haunted her dreams for 6 months. The morning sun caught the angular surfaces of her Raptor as she committed to the intercept, its reflection creating a brief flare of light that seemed to signal her intentions across the empty sky. 3 miles separated her from the truth, and the distance was closing fast. The bogey's response confirmed what Nakamura's instincts had been screaming. Instead of defensive maneuvering or aggressive posturing, the lead aircraft executed a textbook recognition turn, exposing its ventral surfaces while maintaining non-threatening geometry. It was the kind of maneuver drilled into every Air Force pilot during identification training, but executed with a precision that spoke of advanced systems and exceptional skill. "Control, Wraith has visual contact," she transmitted, her voice carefully neutral despite the adrenaline surge as details became clear through her helmet-mounted sight. "Lead bogey appears to be. Oh, Jesus." The aircraft suspended in her forward field of view defied immediate classification. Its basic configuration suggested American design philosophy, but the execution was unlike anything in the current inventory. The airframe seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if reality couldn't quite decide on its exact dimensions. More unsettling were the markings, barely visible ghost impressions of squadron insignia that should have been painted over decades ago. "Wraith, report," Rodriguez demanded, his Raptor maintaining overwatch position while the rest of the flight held formation. "Sir, I'm looking at what appears to be an F-22 variant, but the configuration doesn't match any known production model. The airframe geometry is fluid. And control, I'm reading energy signatures that suggest this aircraft is operating under power systems we don't currently deploy." The AWACS controller's response came sharp and immediate. "All aircraft, this is Control. Weapons hold remains in effect. Wraith, maintain observation distance and continue reporting." But the decision was taken out of her hands as the mysterious formation began a coordinated turn toward her position. Not aggressive, not defensive, but purposeful. They wanted to talk, and they were going to do it face to face. "Wraith, they're closing," Williams called out, her voice tight with controlled tension. Range 2 miles and decreasing. Do we bug out or do we dance? Nakamura's mind raced through tactical options while her hands maintained steady control inputs. The smart play was to maintain distance, gather intelligence, and let the strategic planners figure out next steps. But something about the lead aircraft's approach pattern triggered memories she'd spent months trying to suppress. The subtle wing waggle, the precise timing of course corrections, the way the pilot seemed to anticipate her own maneuvering decisions. Ghost lead, this is Wraith on guard frequency, she transmitted on the emergency channel, using the call sign that had belonged to a dead man. If you can hear this transmission, acknowledge with a port wing dip. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, impossibly, the lead aircraft's left wing dropped 15 degrees before returning to level flight. Mother of God, she whispered, forgetting her mic was open. Wraith, say again. Rodriguez's voice carried a new urgency. But Nakamura was already adjusting course to match the mysterious formation's heading, her Raptor sliding into a loose tactical spread that would allow for rapid maneuvering while maintaining visual contact. Whatever was happening here went beyond normal intercept protocols. This was personal, and she was going to see it through to whatever conclusion awaited in the empty sky ahead. The ghosts had finally come home, and she was the only one qualified to welcome them back. The revelation hit her like a physical blow as the formation settled into cruise configuration. She was flying wing to wing with aircraft that shouldn't exist, piloted by men who should be dead, using technology that belonged to programs buried so deep they barely rated whispered rumors in Pentagon corridors. But the evidence was undeniable, painted in precise formation flying and tactical signatures that no amount of classified training could replicate. Control, Wraith, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. I have positive identification on the lead element. These are not hostile aircraft. Repeat, contacts are friendly, origin unknown. Wraith, Control, explain your identification criteria. How do you explain recognizing a ghost? How do you tell a room full of analysts and generals that you're certain about the identity of pilots whose death certificates you'd personally signed? Nakamura chose her words with surgical precision. Sir, tactical signatures match archived friendly patterns with accuracy beyond statistical probability. Formation discipline and maneuvering characteristics indicate advanced training consistent with U.S. pilot education standards. Requesting permission to establish direct communication. The pause that followed was longer this time, filled with the background chatter of secure communications networks carrying her report up through layers of command authority. When the response came, it carried the weight of decisions made in rooms she'd never see. Wraith, Control, you are cleared to attempt communication on discrete frequency 247.75. All other aircraft maintain overwatch positions. Rodriguez's voice cut in immediately. Control, Viper 1. Recommend we pull back and let the spooks handle this. Wraith's getting too close to whatever this is. Negative, Viper 1. Wraith is cleared to continue approach. Maintain current position and be prepared to provide support if required. Nakamura switched to the designated frequency, her thumb hesitating over the transmit button. The words that came next would either confirm her sanity or prove that 6 months of nightmares had finally broken her grip on reality. Ghost lead, Wraith on discrete frequency. I know you can hear me, Phantom, I know it's you. The static that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, impossibly, a voice she'd mourned for 2 years crackled through her headset. Hello, Kestrel, took you long enough to find us. The familiar drawl hit her like a physical impact, threatening to overwhelm the emotional barriers she'd constructed around her memories of Captain James Chen. He'd been the one to give her the call sign, Wraith, earned during a training exercise where she'd managed to slip past an entire aggressor squadron undetected. He'd also been the one to die when his Raptor suffered catastrophic system failure during a routine training mission. His body never recovered from the Pacific depths. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered, forgetting protocol entirely. "Death is a bureaucratic inconvenience, Wraith. We have work to finish." The implications of his words sent ice through her veins. If Chen was alive, if the entire Ghost Squadron was operational, then everything she'd been told about their fate was a lie constructed to hide something far more significant than a training accident. The hunt was becoming something else entirely, and she was no longer sure who was hunting whom. Chen's voice carried across the encrypted channel with the same easy confidence she remembered, as if death had been merely an extended leave of absence rather than a permanent assignment. The impossibility of the conversation warred with the evidence of her own senses as she maintained formation with aircraft that shouldn't exist. "Phantom, where the hell have you been for 2 years?" The question came out harder than she'd intended, carrying all the grief and anger she'd buried beneath layers of professional composure. "Working a different kind of mission, Kestrel, the kind that requires official death certificates and plausible deniability, the kind that ends when people like you start asking the right questions." Through her canopy, she could see him clearly now in the lead aircraft's cockpit, his helmet silhouette unmistakable despite the impossible circumstances. He raised his left hand in a gesture she recognized, a subtle sign language they'd developed during their partnership. The message was simple: trust required. "Control, Wraith," she transmitted on the primary frequency, her tactical mind already working through the implications. "Request permission to escort unknown formation to secure airspace for extended debriefing." "Negative, Wraith. Maintain current position and continue gathering intelligence." But Chen was already making the decision for them. His formation began a gradual climb, heading toward the coordinates of a restricted training area that had been closed to normal operations for the past 18 months. The same area where Exercise Crimson Mirror had taken place, where she'd first encountered the ghost signatures that had haunted her career. "Wraith, they're climbing through Angels 40, Williams called out, her voice tight with concern. "That puts them above our normal operational ceiling." Nakamura's Raptor followed the climb without hesitation, her engines responding smoothly to the increased power setting. Behind her, she could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the AWACS controller, requesting additional assets and higher command authority for whatever was unfolding in the stratosphere above the South China Sea. "Phantom, talk to me," she transmitted on the discrete frequency. "What happened to your squadron? Where have you been operating?" "Questions better answered face to face, Wraith. There are things you need to see, things that will change how you understand everything we've been fighting for." The cryptic response was typically Chen, but the underlying seriousness was new. The man she remembered had been capable of deadly focus when required, but he'd always maintained a lightness that made even the most dangerous missions feel manageable. This version of him carried a weight that spoke to experiences she couldn't imagine. "Are you in trouble, James?" she asked, using his real name for the first time in the conversation. "We all are, Kestrel. The question is whether we're in the same kind of trouble or if you're about to become part of the solution." Ahead of them, restricted airspace beckoned like a doorway into classified nightmares. Whatever waited beyond that threshold would either provide answers to questions that had consumed her for months, or prove that her grip on reality had finally slipped beyond recovery. Either way, she was committed to seeing it through. The ghosts were leading her home, and home was a place that didn't officially exist. The restricted airspace opened before them like a portal into another dimension of military secrecy. As they crossed the boundary coordinates, Nakamura's threat warning systems went active for exactly 3 seconds before falling silent, as if someone had briefly tested her aircraft's defenses before deciding she was cleared to proceed. "Wraith, control. You are now entering restricted airspace Tango 77. Continue current heading and maintain formation integrity. The AWACS controller's voice had changed, becoming more formal and carrying undertones that suggested this entire encounter had been orchestrated rather than stumbled upon. That realization hit her like a cold slap of recognition. She hadn't found the Ghost Squadron by accident. They had found her. Everything from the morning patrol route to the perfect positioning for visual contact had been carefully arranged. "You set this up," she transmitted to Chen on the discrete frequency. "This whole intercept was planned. Necessary, Kestrel. We needed to know if you were ready for the next phase." Next phase of what? But his response was interrupted by the appearance of something that shouldn't exist in any corner of military aviation. Rising from a cloud bank below them came an aircraft carrier that wasn't on any official registry, its deck bristling with aircraft configurations she'd never seen in classified briefings. The vessel itself seemed to shift and blur at the edges, as if cloaked in technology that belonged more to science fiction than contemporary naval architecture. "Jesus Christ," Williams's voice crackled across the formation frequency. "Control, are you seeing this? All aircraft, maintain formation and continue approach," came the calm response from AWACS. "You are cleared for recovery aboard USS Leviathan." USS Leviathan. The name appeared on no public naval registry, belonged to no acknowledged fleet, and operated in waters that officially contained nothing but empty ocean. Yet there it was, impossibly real and undeniably operational, its flight deck arranged to receive aircraft that shouldn't exist, piloted by men who should be dead. Chen's formation began descent toward the carrier's deck, their approach pattern textbook perfect despite the surreal circumstances. Nakamura followed, her training taking over even as her mind struggled to process the implications of what she was seeing. "Phantom, what is this place?" "Home base for operations that exist in the spaces between official policy and necessary action. Welcome to the Deep Black Wraith. Population classified, mission parameters need to know, and you just qualified for both." The carrier's deck grew larger in her windscreen, details becoming clear that defied immediate understanding. The aircraft spotted around the landing area represented configurations she'd seen only in theoretical studies, and whispered rumors from test pilots who'd signed non-disclosure agreements thick enough to stop bullets. Advanced variants of known platforms, experimental designs that pushed the boundaries of current technology, and a few aircraft that seemed to operate on principles she couldn't immediately identify. As her Raptor touched down on the Leviathan's deck, caught perfectly by arresting cables that shouldn't be able to handle a stealth fighter's landing characteristics, Nakamura realized that her career as she'd understood it was over. Whatever came next would be defined by classifications beyond her current clearance level and missions that existed only in the darkest corners of national security policy. The ghosts had brought her home to a place that didn't exist, to join a war that wasn't officially being fought. And somehow, she knew she'd been preparing for this moment her entire career. The Leviathan's flight deck buzzed with activity that belonged to a perfectly choreographed operation rather than the organized chaos she expected. Deck crews moved with precision born of extensive practice, handling aircraft that should have required months of specialized training to service safely. The impossible had become routine here, and everyone acted as if stealth carriers and ghost squadrons were simply another day at the office. Chen's canopy opened first, his familiar silhouette emerging from the cockpit with the same easy grace she remembered. But as he climbed down from his aircraft, details became apparent that drove home just how far from normal circumstances they'd traveled. His flight suit bore patches she didn't recognize, unit designations that existed nowhere in official records, and rank insignia that suggested promotions earned through operations that never appeared in personnel files. "Welcome aboard, Major," he called out as she completed her own shutdown procedures, his voice carrying clearly across the deck, despite the ambient noise of military aviation. Hope the trip wasn't too bumpy. Nakamura dropped from her Raptor's ladder onto deck plating that felt solid and real despite the impossibility of the vessel carrying them. The salt air carried familiar scents of jet fuel and ocean spray, grounding the experience in sensory details that her training recognized even as her mind struggled with the larger implications. "James," she said, approaching him across the deck that separated her old life from whatever came next. "I attended your funeral. I signed papers certifying your death. I've spent 2 years thinking I was responsible for losing my wingman." His expression shifted, showing the first crack in the confident facade he'd maintained throughout their aerial reunion. "The funeral was necessary, Kestrel. My death had to be real enough to satisfy people who were looking very carefully at everyone connected to the Ghost Squadron program. People who would have killed you if they thought you knew too much." "Killed me?" The words hit harder than she'd expected, carrying implications that extended far beyond simple classification protocols. "The project you stumbled into during Crimson Mirror wasn't supposed to have witnesses. You were supposed to see standard aircraft flying standard patterns during a standard exercise. Instead, you identified prototype systems operating under protocols that officially don't exist. That made you either an asset or a liability." Around them, other members of the Ghost Squadron were emerging from their aircraft, pilots she recognized despite their supposed deaths. Captain Rodriguez, officially killed in a training accident 8 months ago. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, lost during a classified mission over Afghanistan according to her service record. Major David Thompson, who had supposedly died in a vehicle accident while on leave. All alive, all operational, all part of something that existed in the spaces between official policy and necessary action. "So you faked your deaths to protect me?" she asked, trying to understand the logic behind the elaborate deception. "We faked our deaths to protect the program," Chen corrected. "Protecting you was a secondary benefit, but one I cared about personally. The question now is whether you're ready to join something that will officially end your career, but actually give it meaning for the first time." A figure approached from the island's superstructure, wearing a uniform that carried flag rank insignia she couldn't immediately identify. The man moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to absolute authority, his weathered features carrying the weight of decisions made in rooms that didn't appear on building directories. "Major Nakamura," he said, his voice carrying the gravitas of classified briefings and operational necessity. "I'm Admiral Harrison, commanding officer of this vessel and director of Project Revenant. We need to talk." The truth was finally within reach, and she wasn't sure she was prepared for what it would cost her to learn it. Admiral Harrison led them through corridors that belonged more to an advanced research facility than a traditional naval vessel. The bulkheads were lined with display screens showing tactical information from around the globe, real-time intelligence feeds that suggested the Leviathan was connected to surveillance networks operating far beyond normal military channels. "Project Revenant began 18 months ago," Harrison explained as they walked, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who delivered this briefing before. Initial mission parameters focused on developing advanced air superiority platforms capable of operating in contested environments where traditional assets would be compromised or detected. They entered a secure briefing room where wall-mounted displays showed aircraft configurations Nakamura had never seen, theoretical designs that pushed the boundaries of current aerodynamic understanding. But more unsettling were the mission profiles scrolling across adjacent screens, operational summaries that suggested combat actions in regions where no official military operations were acknowledged. "The ghost signatures you detected during Exercise Crimson Mirror were the first successful test of adaptive stealth technology," Harrison continued, settling into a chair at the head of a conference table that could accommodate a dozen personnel. Stealth systems that don't simply reduce radar cross-section, but actively modify their electromagnetic signature to mimic other aircraft or disappear entirely from enemy sensors. Chen took a seat beside her, his presence both comforting and deeply unsettling given the circumstances. The technology works, Kestrel, but it requires pilots capable of operating beyond normal human limitations. Pilots who can process tactical information at speeds that push the boundaries of human consciousness. "You're talking about human enhancement," she said, the implications crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on glass. "Chemical enhancement, neural augmentation, genetic modification." "All of the above," Harrison confirmed. "The enemy we're facing doesn't restrict itself to conventional limitations. Neither can we." The displays around the room shifted to show intelligence assessments that painted a picture of threats operating well beyond public awareness. Advanced aircraft using technology that shouldn't exist, piloted by individuals whose capabilities exceeded normal human parameters, conducting operations that threatened global stability through methods that remained barely detectable. "Who are we fighting?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would challenge everything she thought she understood about contemporary geopolitics. "Ourselves," Harrison replied. "Enhanced pilots flying advanced aircraft, conducting operations that exist in the gray areas between nations. Private military contractors with access to technology that should be restricted to government agencies. Criminal organizations with resources that exceed some national military budgets. And occasionally, elements of our own military-industrial complex that have decided national policy moves too slowly for their preferred timelines." The weight of what he was describing settled over her like a shroud. A shadow war fought by enhanced pilots using technology that officially didn't exist, for stakes that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Combat operations that would never appear in history books, casualties that would never be honored with memorials, victories that would never be celebrated because they couldn't be admitted. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked, though the question felt hollow even as she spoke it. "You have a natural ability to process tactical information at speeds that normally require enhancement to achieve," Chen answered. "During Crimson Mirror, you identified our entire formation and predicted our tactical responses without any of the augmentation protocols the rest of us require. That makes you either the most naturally gifted pilot anyone has ever encountered, or someone whose basic neurological configuration is already operating at enhanced levels." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd attributed to training and intuition might actually be evidence of capabilities she'd never understood about herself. "We're offering you a choice, Major," Harrison said, his tone carrying the weight of decisions that would define the rest of her life. "Join Project Revenant and help us fight a war that officially doesn't exist, or return to conventional operations with memories that will be carefully edited to protect operational security." The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and they all knew it. She'd been born for this, trained for this, and drawn into it by instincts that operated beyond conscious understanding. The ghosts had found their newest member, and she was finally ready to accept her commission in the war between shadows. The medical evaluation process took 3 days, during which Nakamura discovered that the Leviathan was far more than an impossible aircraft carrier. The vessel served as a mobile command center, research facility, and operational base for missions that pushed the boundaries of both technology and human capability. The medical bay, where she underwent evaluation, contained equipment that belonged in advanced research hospitals rather than military vessels. "Your neurological baseline readings are remarkable," Dr. Elena Vasquez explained as she reviewed test results that covered every aspect of human performance from reaction time to pattern recognition. "Most pilots require significant augmentation to achieve the processing speeds you demonstrate naturally. Your brain already operates at frequencies that allow for the kind of tactical awareness we've been trying to artificially enhance." The implications were both exhilarating and terrifying. Are you saying I'm already enhanced somehow? I'm saying you represent what we hope enhancement can achieve. The question is whether we can improve on what nature has already provided, or if modification would actually reduce your capabilities. Chen appeared in the medical bay doorway, carrying flight gear she didn't recognize. The suit was clearly advanced beyond standard issue, incorporating systems that suggested integration with aircraft far more sophisticated than anything in the acknowledged inventory. "Time for a test flight, Wraith," he said, using her call sign with the same casual familiarity that had defined their partnership. "Admiral wants to see how well you adapt to enhanced aircraft systems." The aircraft waiting on the flight deck defied immediate classification. It shared basic configuration elements with the F-22 she knew, but every surface seemed to shimmer with technology that bent light around its edges. The cockpit displays showed information density that would overwhelm most pilots, tactical data streams that required processing capabilities beyond normal human limits. "This is Revenant 7, Chen explained as she examined the aircraft. "Adaptive stealth, neural interface systems, and performance parameters that push the boundaries of what airframes can handle. The question is whether you can handle what the airframe is capable of." Strapping into the enhanced aircraft felt like plugging into a direct neural connection with the aircraft itself. Information flowed through her consciousness at speeds that should have been overwhelming, but instead felt natural and intuitive. The aircraft's system seemed to anticipate her intentions, responding to thoughts before she consciously formed them into commands. "Revenant 7, Ghost Control, you are cleared for departure," came the transmission from the Leviathan's tower. "Proceed to Training Area Whiskey 9 for evaluation exercises." The takeoff felt like being launched into another dimension of flight. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision that exceeded anything she'd experienced, its performance parameters limited only by what human physiology could endure. But more unsettling was the way the system seemed to understand her tactical intentions, providing information and options that matched her thinking patterns with uncanny accuracy. "How does it feel, Wraith?" Chen's voice came through the communication system as he took formation position off her port wing. "Like I've been flying compromised aircraft my entire career," she replied, banking into a tactical maneuver that would have stressed a conventional fighter beyond safe limits. "This is what pilots are supposed to have access to. This is what pilots fighting the real war need to survive," he corrected. "The enemy we're facing has been operating enhanced systems for months. We're playing catch-up with technology they've been using to gain tactical advantage in operations that never make the news." As they ran through evaluation exercises that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their limits, Nakamura realized that her old career hadn't prepared her for this level of capability. The enhanced aircraft didn't just perform better, it thought faster, anticipated threats more accurately, and provided tactical options that conventional systems couldn't even recognize. By the time they returned to the Leviathan, she understood that there was no going back to conventional operations. She'd tasted the future of air combat, and everything else would feel like flying with artificial limitations imposed by bureaucratic compromise. The war in the shadows required warriors who could operate beyond normal human limits, and she was finally ready to join their ranks. The debriefing session that followed her evaluation flight took place in a secure compartment deep within the Leviathan's hull, where electromagnetic shielding ensured that no signals could enter or leave without authorization. Admiral Harrison presided over the session with the focused intensity of someone reviewing mission-critical intelligence. "Your adaptation rate exceeded our most optimistic projections," he began, reviewing performance data that scrolled across multiple displays. "Neural interface synchronization achieved levels that typically require weeks of conditioning. Aircraft systems integration was seamless. Tactical response patterns showed improvement over baseline performance that we haven't seen in any other pilot. Chen leaned forward in his chair, studying readouts that detailed every aspect of her flight performance. The question now is whether we accelerate your integration into active operations or continue with extended training protocols. What kind of active operations? She asked, though the gravity in their expressions suggested missions that would challenge everything she understood about contemporary military engagement. 3 days ago, enhanced aircraft launched coordinated strikes against civilian infrastructure in Eastern Europe, Harrison replied, bringing up intelligence imagery that showed precision damage to power stations and communications facilities. The attacks were blamed on terrorist organizations, but the tactical precision and aircraft performance parameters indicate pilots operating with capabilities we've only seen in Project Revenant personnel. The implications crystallized in her mind like ice forming in deep water. Someone else has access to enhancement technology. Someone else has been using enhancement technology to conduct operations that serve no apparent national interest, Chen corrected. The strikes were designed to destabilize regional security without providing obvious benefit to any recognized state actor. That suggests private operators working agendas that don't align with any government policy. Additional displays showed tactical analysis of the Eastern European strikes, aircraft performance data that indicated capabilities matching or exceeding what she just experienced in Revenant 7. The enhanced pilots conducting those operations possessed skills that should be restricted to the most classified military programs, yet they were using those abilities to destabilize civilian infrastructure. We have intelligence suggesting similar enhanced operations are planned for targets in Southeast Asia and Central America, Harrison continued. Coordinated strikes designed to create regional instability without clear attribution to any nation-state. The kind of operations that benefit organizations operating in the gray areas between legal commerce and outright criminal enterprise. You want me to stop them, she said, understanding her role in the larger operational picture. We want you to help us identify them, Chen replied. Enhanced pilots operate with tactical signatures that can be recognized by other enhanced personnel. You've already demonstrated ability to identify aircraft and pilots based on behavioral patterns that conventional analysis would miss. Applied to enemy-enhanced operations, that capability could provide intelligence we can't obtain through normal channels. The weight of what they were asking settled over her like a mantle of responsibility she'd never requested, but couldn't refuse. The Shadow War wasn't just about advanced technology or enhanced human capabilities. It was about preventing those capabilities from being used to destabilize global security by operators who answered to no legitimate authority. When do we deploy? She asked, accepting the mission parameters that would define the rest of her career. 48 hours, Harrison replied. Intelligence indicates the next enhanced operation will target infrastructure in the Philippines. We'll position Leviathan within intercept range and deploy Ghost Squadron to provide air superiority during what will appear to be routine patrol operations. As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out of the secure compartment, Chen remained behind to speak with her privately. His expression carried weight that went beyond operational concerns, touching on personal connections that had survived official death and bureaucratic resurrection. Are you sure about this, Kestrel? He asked. Once you're fully integrated into Revenant operations, there's no returning to conventional military service. Your official career ends here, and what replaces it exists only in the spaces between acknowledged policy and necessary action. She looked at him across the small space that separated her old life from her new mission, understanding that the choice had already been made the moment she'd identified his aircraft over the South China Sea. I've been preparing for this my entire career, she replied. I just didn't know what I was preparing for. The Ghosts had claimed their newest member, and the Shadow War had found its most naturally gifted pilot. Now the real work could begin. The 48-hour preparation period transformed Nakamura from a conventional pilot into something that existed in the spaces between military regulation and operational necessity. The process involved briefings that didn't officially occur, equipment that wasn't acknowledged to exist, and mission parameters that would never appear in after-action reports. Her new flight suit incorporated technology that pushed the boundaries of current materials science, with embedded systems that interfaced directly with enhanced aircraft neural networks.